The dust swirled thick through the main street of Clearwater Creek as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town. It was the kind of heat that made tempers run short, and good judgment even shorter, especially when fear had already taken root in people's hearts. 16-year-old Anna Sullivan knelt in the dirt outside Morrison's general store, her worn brown dress already coated with dust from the day's work. Her red hair, usually kept in a neat braid, had come loose in wisps around her freckled face as she scrubbed the wooden steps with a brush that had seen better days. Being an orphan in a town like Clearwater Creek meant taking whatever work she could find, and today that meant cleaning the steps of every business on Main Street for a few coins and maybe a meal. Anna had been on her own for 3 years now, ever since her parents died in a wagon accident on their way to California. At 13, she'd been left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the kindness of strangers, which she'd quickly learned was a precious commodity in short supply. The townspeople tolerated her presence because she worked hard and kept to herself, but she was always aware that she existed on the edges of their community, never quite belonging. The sound of raised voices from inside the store caught her attention. Through the open door, she could hear Jake Morrison, the store owner, talking animatedly with several other men. "I'm telling you, it's getting worse," Morrison was saying, his voice tight with frustration. 3 more businesses hit last night: the bank, the doctor's office, and Hendrick's blacksmith shop. Someone's been breaking in and stealing whatever they can get their hands on. "Any idea who it might be?" asked Tom Bradley, the town's self-appointed leader despite holding no official position. Bradley owned the largest ranch in the area and had the kind of influence that came with money and a willingness to use it. "Could be drifters passing through," suggested another voice that Anna recognized as belonging to Sheriff Dawson, a man more interested in keeping the peace than actually solving crimes. "Or maybe someone local who's fallen on hard times." Anna tried to focus on her scrubbing, but the conversation was impossible to ignore. The recent string of thefts had everyone on edge, and she'd noticed the way people looked at her with increased suspicion. Being the town's only homeless person made her an easy target for blame. "What about that girl?" Bradley's voice carried a note of accusation that made Anna's blood run cold. "The orphan who's always hanging around, looking for handouts. She'd know which places have money lying around." Anna Sullivan, Morrison sounded uncertain. "I don't know, Tom. She's always seemed honest enough to me. Works hard for what little I can pay her." "Honest?" Bradley scoffed. "Jake, you're too trusting. Think about it, she's got no family, no real home, no steady income. What's to stop her from taking what she needs? And she's been cleaning businesses all over town. She'd know exactly where to look." Anna's hands stilled on the brush as panic began to rise in her chest. She could hear the murmur of agreement from some of the other men, the way suspicion spread like wildfire when people were looking for someone to blame. "I still think we should wait for more evidence," Sheriff Dawson said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Can't just accuse someone without proof." "What more proof do you need?" Bradley's voice was getting louder, more insistent. "She's the only one in town with motive and opportunity. Hell, she was probably watching all of us, planning which places to hit next." Anna knew she should leave, should quietly gather her things and disappear before this conversation went any further. But she was frozen in place, listening to her life being dissected and her character destroyed by men who barely knew her. "The way I see it," Bradley continued, "we've got a thief in our midst, and we all know who it is. The only question is what we're going to do about it." "Now hold on, Tom," Morrison interjected. "Even if you're right and I'm not saying you are, we can't just take the law into our own hands. This is supposed to be a civilized town." "Civilized?" Bradley laughed harshly. "Jake, we're barely hanging on out here as it is. One bad harvest, one dry season, one too many thefts, and this whole town could fold. We can't afford to be soft on crime, especially when it's being committed by someone who doesn't even belong here." The words hit Anna like physical blows. "Doesn't even belong here." It was what she'd always feared people thought about her, and now it was being said out loud. She was so focused on the conversation that she didn't notice the figure approaching from down the street until a shadow fell across her work area. Looking up, She saw Samuel Hayes, a man who commanded attention despite, or perhaps because of, his obvious disability. Samuel was in his early 30s, tall and lean with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. His hair was dark brown, streaked with premature gray, and his face bore the kind of scars that spoke of a hard life. But it was his eyes that people noticed first, or rather, the fact that they were clearly sightless, milky white and unfocused. He wore dark glasses to hide them, and carried a walking stick that he used to navigate the world he could no longer see. "Afternoon, Miss Anna," he said quietly, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd grown up in Texas cattle country. "Working hard as usual, I see, Mr. Hayes," Anna replied, grateful for a friendly voice amid the hostility she'd been overhearing. "Just trying to earn my keep." Samuel tilted his head slightly. A gesture Anna had learned meant he was listening carefully to something. His hearing, like that of many blind people, was extraordinarily acute. "Sounds like there's quite a discussion goin' on in there," he observed. Anna's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Yes, sir. About the recent thefts. They think I might be responsible." Samuel's expression darkened. "Is that so? And what evidence do they have to support this theory?" "None that I know of," Anna said bitterly. "But I suppose being poor and homeless is evidence enough for some people." Samuel was quiet for a moment, still listening to the voices from inside the store. "You know, Miss Anna, I've been around long enough to recognize the sound of a lynch mob forming. And that's exactly what I'm hearing in there." Anna's stomach clenched with fear. "What do you mean?" "I mean Tom Bradley has decided you're guilty, and he's working on convincing everyone else. Men like Bradley don't care much about evidence or fair trials. They care about having someone to blame, and the power that comes with being the one to dispense justice." As if summoned by their conversation, Tom Bradley emerged from the store, followed by Morrison, Sheriff Dawson, and several other townsmen. Bradley was a big man, well-fed and prosperous-looking, with the kind of confidence that came from never having his authority seriously challenged. His eyes fixed on Anna with unconcealed suspicion. Well, speaking of our little problem." Anna scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. "Mr. Bradley, I save it." Bradley cut her off. "I think we all know why you're here, lurking around outside while honest folks are trying to conduct business." "She's working," Samuel said quietly, but his voice carried clearly in the afternoon air. "Same as she does every day." Bradley's attention shifted to the blind man, and his expression grew even more hostile. "Nobody asked for your opinion, Hayes. This doesn't concern you." "I think it does," Samuel replied calmly. "When I hear a group of men planning to railroad a young woman without a shred of evidence, I consider that my concern." "Evidence?" Bradley laughed harshly. "What more evidence do we need? She's got no money, no family, no prospects. She's been casing every business in town under the pretense of working. And now, suddenly, we've got a crime wave. You don't have to be a detective to connect those dots." "Actually," Samuel said, his voice still maddeningly calm, "you do need to be a detective to make accusations like that stick, or at least someone who cares about the truth." Anna could see the anger building in Bradley's face, the way his hands clenched into fists. These were dangerous waters, and she didn't want Samuel getting hurt because of her problems. "Mr. Hayes, please," she said quietly. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do," Samuel interrupted gently, "because what's happening here isn't justice. Miss Anna, it's just a powerful man looking for someone weak to blame." Bradley took a step forward, his bulk seeming to fill the space between them. "You want to be careful, Hayes. Just because folks feel sorry for you doesn't mean you can interfere with town business. And just because you own the biggest ranch doesn't mean you own the town." Samuel replied, "Though I suspect you've forgotten that distinction." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Anna could see other townspeople gathering, drawn by the raised voices and the promise of drama. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same mixture of fear, excitement, and bloodlust that she'd seen in crowds before. It was the look of people who wanted someone to pay for their problems, regardless of whether that someone was actually guilty. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat nervously. "Now, gentlemen, let's not let this get out of hand. Tom, you've made your suspicions clear. Samuel, you've expressed your concerns. Maybe we should all take a step back and no, Bradley said firmly. I'm tired of taking steps back while this town gets robbed blind. We know who's responsible, and it's time to do something about it. He turned to address the growing crowd. Folks, we've got a thief among us. Someone who's been taking advantage of our trust and our generosity. Someone who repays kindness with theft and hospitality with betrayal. Anna felt the eyes of the crowd turning toward her, and she could see the suspicion and anger building in their faces. These were people she'd worked for, people she'd helped when she could, people who'd known her for 3 years. But fear and the need for someone to blame were stronger than any good feelings. They might have had to ward her. Now wait just a minute, Morrison said, stepping forward. Anna's always been honest with me. I've never had anything go missing when she's been working in my store. That you know of, Bradley replied smoothly. How carefully do you really watch your inventory? Jake, how would you know if a few small items went missing here and there? Morrison's confidence wavered, and Anna could see doubt creeping into his expression. Once that doubt took hold, she knew it would spread like wildfire through the crowd. This is madness, Samuel said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. You're about to destroy a young woman's life based on nothing more than prejudice and convenience, and you're about to interfere with justice. Bradley shot back. Though I suppose we shouldn't be surprised. Birds of a feather, after all. What's that supposed to mean? Bradley's smile was cruel. Just that maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe it's not just one person doing the stealing. Maybe it's a partnership. The girl cases the joints, and you well. Who'd ever suspect a blind man of being a burglar? The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Anna saw Samuel's face go white with shock and anger, and she realized that Bradley had just escalated. This far beyond what anyone had expected. You son of a... Samuel started forward, his walking stick raised, but Anna caught his arm. Don't, she whispered urgently. That's what he wants. He wants you to lose control so he can claim you're dangerous. Samuel stopped, his jaw clenched with the effort of controlling his temper. But Anna could see that the damage was already done. Bradley had successfully planted the seed of suspicion about both of them, and the crowd was eating it up. You know what? Bradley said, his voice carrying a note of finality. I think we've talked enough. It's time for action. He turned to Sheriff Dawson. Sheriff, I'm making a formal accusation against Anna Sullivan for the recent string of burglaries. I demand you arrest her immediately. Dawson looked uncomfortable, glancing between Bradley and Anna with obvious reluctance. Tom, I don't know. Without more evidence. The evidence is there if you choose to see it. Bradley insisted. And if you won't do your job, maybe it's time for the citizens of this town to take matters into their own hands. The crowd murmured its agreement, and Anna felt her world beginning to collapse around her. She was 16 years old, alone in the world, and about to become the scapegoat for every crime and misfortune that had befallen Clearwater Creek. As the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street, Anna Sullivan realized that her life was a boo. To change forever and not for the better. The only question now was whether anyone would stand up for her when the time came, or if she would face whatever was coming completely alone. The answer to that question would determine not just her fate, but the soul of Clearwater Creek itself. The crowd in front of Morrison's general store had grown to nearly 50 people. Drawn by the commotion and the promise of drama that seemed to electrify the hot afternoon air, Anna found herself at the center of a circle of hostile faces. Feeling like a cornered animal with nowhere to run, Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his gun belt, more out of nervous habit than any real intention to use the weapon. At 45, he was a man who had taken the sheriff's job because it paid better than ranch work, not because he had any particular talent for law enforcement. Situations like this where the town's most influential citizen was demanding action were exactly what he'd been hoping to avoid. Tom, I understand your concerns, Dawson said carefully, but I can't just arrest someone without proper evidence. There are procedures. Bradley's voice boomed across the gathering. Sheriff, we've had 5 businesses robbed in the past 2 weeks. That's not a crime wave, that's an epidemic. And while you're worried about procedures, This girl is probably planning her next theft. Anna's voice was small, but determined when she spoke. I haven't stolen anything from anyone. I work for what I earn. And I've never taken so much as a penny that wasn't given to me. Of course you'd say that, called out Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, her voice shrill with indignation. What thief ever admits to their crimes? A smart one wouldn't, agreed Pete Hendricks, the blacksmith whose shop had been robbed just the night before. And this one's been clever enough to avoid getting caught so far. Samuel Hayes tapped his walking stick against the wooden step, the sound sharp and authoritative. Has anyone here actually seen Miss Anna commit a crime? Anyone at all? The crowd fell silent for a moment, and Anna felt a flicker of hope. But Bradley was quick to fill the silence. We don't need to see her in the act, he said dismissively. The pattern is clear enough. Every place she's worked has been hit within days. That's not a coincidence, actually. Morrison interjected hesitantly. My store hasn't been robbed. And Anna's been working here regular for the past month. Bradley's eyes narrowed. That just proves she's smart enough not to steal from the people who employ her directly. She hits the other businesses to throw off suspicion. Anna could see how Bradley twisted every piece of information to fit his narrative. No matter what evidence might emerge in her favor, he would find a way to make it seem like proof of her guilt. This is getting us nowhere, said Dr. Matthews, an elderly man who served as the town's physician. If we're going to make accusations, we need to be sure of our facts. The facts are simple, Doc, Bradley replied. We've got a crime spree, and we've got someone with motive, opportunity, and no real ties to this community. Sometimes the obvious answer is the right answer. And sometimes, Samuel said quietly, the obvious answer is just the convenient one. Bradley wheeled on him, his face flushed with anger. You know what, Hayes? I'm getting real tired of your interference. Maybe it's time we talked about your role in all this. My role? Samuel's voice was dangerously calm. You show up in town about 6 months ago, claiming to be a drifter looking for work. But what kind of work can a blind man really do? Maybe you found a different line of work, one that doesn't require sight, but does require inside information. The accusation sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Anna had heard the whispers about Samuel since he'd arrived in Clearwater Creek. Questions about his past, speculation about how he supported himself, and the general suspicion that frontier towns often harbored toward outsiders. I do odd jobs, Samuel said evenly. Repair work, cleaning, anything that doesn't require sight. People in this town can verify that, can they? Bradley pressed, or do they just see you hanging around, listening to conversations, learning who has money and who doesn't? Anna watched in horror as Bradley systematically destroyed Samuel's reputation the same way he had destroyed hers. The man was a master at turning suspicion into certainty, at making innocent actions seem sinister. You're grasping at straws, Dr. Matthews said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Bradley smiled coldly. Think about it. Folks, a young woman who knows everyone's. What? Sheriff Dawson asked. It means they're smarter than we gave them credit for. Bradley replied. They've hidden the evidence well, or gotten rid of it entirely. But that doesn't make them any less guilty. The crowd murmured its agreement, and Anna felt her last hope fading. She was trapped in a nightmare where innocence was impossible to prove and guilt was assumed, regardless of evidence. So what do you propose we do? Someone called out. Bradley's smile was cold and calculating. I propose we send a message that Clearwater Creek won't tolerate thieves. A message that will make sure this never happens again. The implication hung in the air like a threat, and Anna realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about accusations anymore. The crowd was working itself up to something much worse than a simple arrest. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty street, Anna Sullivan faced the terrifying realization that she might not live to see another sunrise. And standing beside her, Samuel Hayes prepared to make a choice that would define not just his own character, but the moral soul of an entire town. As twilight settled over Clearwater Creek, the crowd had transformed from a group of concerned citizens into something far more dangerous. The heat of the day had given way to the cool of evening, but the temperature of emotions in the street continued to rise, Torches began to appear in people's hands, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the weathered faces of men and women who had abandoned reason in favor of mob justice. Anna stood in the center of the crowd, feeling like she was watching her own execution being planned. The accusations had moved beyond theft. Now whispers of witchcraft and devil worship were beginning to circulate, the kind of wild rumors that took root in frightened communities looking for someone to blame for their troubles. "I say we run them both out of town," called out Pete Hendricks, his massive blacksmith's frame towering over those around him. "Send them into the desert with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Let them see how they like stealing from the rattlesnakes and coyotes. That's too good for them," Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice sharp with vindictive pleasure. "Thieves deserve worse than exile. They deserve to be made an example of." Samuel moved closer to Anna, his presence offering the only comfort available in the increasingly hostile crowd. Despite his blindness, he seemed to sense the growing danger more acutely than anyone else. "Miss Anna," he murmured quietly, "when I give the word, I want you to run. Head for the church. It's the only place in town that might offer sanctuary." "I won't leave you," Anna whispered back. "They're only after you because you tried to help me. And I'll keep trying to help you," Samuel replied firmly. "But not if you get yourself killed out of misplaced loyalty." Tom Bradley climbed onto a wooden crate someone had produced, elevating himself above the crowd like a politician addressing his constituents. The torchlight flickered across his face, giving him an almost demonic appearance as he prepared to deliver what Anna feared would be her death sentence. "Citizens of Clearwater Creek," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, "we stand at a crossroads. We can either allow criminals to prey upon our community with impunity, or we can take a stand and show the world that we will not be victims." The crowd cheered, a sound that sent chills down Anna's spine. These were people she had known for years, people who had seen her grow from a 13-year-old orphan into a young woman, trying to make her way in the world. But fear and anger had transformed them into strangers. "The evidence is clear," Bradley continued. "We have been harboring thieves in our midst, parasites who have repaid our Christian charity with betrayal and theft. But tonight, we have the opportunity to cleanse our community of this corruption." What are you suggesting, Tom?" asked Dr. Matthews, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. Bradley's smile was cold and merciless. "I'm suggesting we hold a trial, a real trial, conducted by the people who have been wronged. And if these criminals are found guilty, we execute the punishment that frontier justice demands." "What punishment?" Sheriff Dawson asked, though his voice was barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Fire," Bradley said simply. "The ancient punishment for those who steal from their neighbors and corrupt the innocent. We burn out the evil so it can never spread." The word hit Anna like a physical blow. Fire. They were talking about burning her alive, and the crowd was actually considering it. She could see it in their faces, the mixture of excitement and bloodlust that came with the promise of violence sanctioned by righteousness. "Now hold on," Dr. Matthews said, stepping forward with obvious distress. "Tom, we can't seriously be considering." "Considering what, Doc?" Bradley interrupted. "Justice, protection of our community? Or are you suggesting we should just let these thieves continue preying on us?" "I'm suggesting we follow the law," Matthews replied, though his voice lacked the conviction to stand against the mob. "We have courts, proper procedures. The nearest judge is 3 days' ride," Bradley replied dismissively. "And what guarantee do we have that these two won't escape before then? Or that some slick lawyer won't get them off on a technicality?" The crowd murmured its agreement. Anna could see how Bradley was systematically destroying every argument for mercy or proper legal procedure. He was a master at reading the mob's mood and feeding its darkest impulses. "Besides," Bradley continued, "who knows better than we do whether these people are guilty? We're the ones who've been robbed. We're the ones who've suffered. Why should we hand over our justice to some?" "What?" Sheriff Dawson asked. "It means they're smarter than we gave them credit for," Bradley replied. "They've hidden the evidence well, or gotten rid of it entirely. But that doesn't make them any less guilty." The crowd murmured its agreement, and Anna felt her last hope fading. She was trapped in a nightmare where innocence was impossible to prove and guilt was assumed, regardless of evidence. "So what do you propose we do?" someone called out. Bradley's smile was cold and calculating. "I propose we send a message that Clearwater Creek won't tolerate thieves. A message that will make sure this never happens again." The implication hung in the air like a threat, and Anna realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about accusations anymore. The crowd was working itself up to something much worse than a simple arrest. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty street, Anna Sullivan faced the terrifying realization that she might not live to see another sunrise. And standing beside her, Samuel Hayes prepared to make a choice that would define not just his own character, but the moral soul of an entire town. As twilight settled over Clearwater Creek, the crowd had transformed from a group of concerned citizens into something far more dangerous. The heat of the day had given way to the cool of evening, but the temperature of emotions in the street continued to rise. Torches began to appear in people's hands, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the weathered faces of men and women who had abandoned reason in favor of mob justice. Anna stood in the center of the crowd, feeling like she was watching her own execution being planned. The accusations had moved beyond theft. Now whispers of witchcraft and devil worship were beginning to circulate, the kind of wild rumors that took root in frightened communities looking for someone to blame for their troubles. "I say we run them both out of town," called out Pete Hendricks, his massive blacksmith's frame towering over those around him. "Send them into the desert with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Let them see how they like stealing from the rattlesnakes and coyotes. That's too good for them," Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice sharp with vindictive pleasure. "Thieves deserve worse than exile. They deserve to be made an example of." Samuel moved closer to Anna, his presence offering the only comfort available in the increasingly hostile crowd. Despite his blindness, he seemed to sense the growing danger more acutely than anyone else. "Miss Anna," he murmured quietly, "when I give the word, I want you to run. Head for the church. It's the only place in town that might offer sanctuary." "I won't leave you," Anna whispered back. "They're only after you because you tried to help me. And I'll keep trying to help you," Samuel replied firmly. "But not if you get yourself killed out of misplaced loyalty." Tom Bradley climbed onto a wooden crate someone had produced, elevating himself above the crowd like a politician addressing his constituents. The torchlight flickered across his face, giving him an almost demonic appearance as he prepared to deliver what Anna feared would be her death sentence. "Citizens of Clearwater Creek," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, "we stand at a crossroads. We can either allow criminals to prey upon our community with impunity, or we can take a stand and show the world that we will not be victims." The crowd cheered, a sound that sent chills down Anna's spine. These were people she had known for years, people who had seen her grow from a 13-year-old orphan into a young woman, trying to make her way in the world. But fear and anger had transformed them into strangers. "The evidence is clear," Bradley continued. "We have been harboring thieves in our midst, parasites who have repaid our Christian charity with betrayal and theft. But tonight, we have the opportunity to cleanse our community of this corruption." What are you suggesting, Tom?" asked Dr. Matthews, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. Bradley's smile was cold and merciless. "I'm suggesting we hold a trial, a real trial, conducted by the people who have been wronged. And if these criminals are found guilty, we execute the punishment that frontier justice demands." "What punishment?" Sheriff Dawson asked, though his voice was barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Fire," Bradley said simply. "The ancient punishment for those who steal from their neighbors and corrupt the innocent. We burn out the evil so it can never spread." The word hit Anna like a physical blow. Fire. They were talking about burning her alive, and the crowd was actually considering it. She could see it in their faces, the mixture of excitement and bloodlust that came with the promise of violence sanctioned by righteousness. "Now hold on," Dr. Matthews said, stepping forward with obvious distress. "Tom, we can't seriously be considering." "Considering what, Doc?" Bradley interrupted. "Justice, protection of our community, Or are you suggesting we should just let these thieves continue preying on us? I'm suggesting we follow the law, Matthews replied, though his voice lacked the conviction to stand against the mob. We have courts, proper procedures. The nearest judge is 3 days' ride, Bradley replied dismissively. And what guarantee do we have that these two won't escape before then? Or that some slick lawyer won't get them off on a technicality? The crowd murmured its agreement. Anna could see how Bradley was systematically destroying every argument for mercy or proper legal procedure. He was a master at reading the mob's mood and feeding its darkest impulses. Besides, Bradley continued, who knows better than we do whether these people are guilty? We're the ones who've been robbed. We're the ones who've suffered. Why should we hand over our justice to some distant authority who doesn't understand our situation? Samuel's voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade. Because that's what separates civilization from barbarism, Mr. Bradley. The rule of law instead of the rule of the mob. Bradley's attention fixed on Samuel like a predator focusing on prey, still trying to interfere. Hayes, tell me, what's your stake in protecting this girl? What has she promised you in return for your loyalty? The implication was clear and ugly, and Anna saw several people in the crowd nod as if it confirmed their suspicions. Samuel's face went white with anger, but his voice remained steady. My stake is in seeing justice done instead of witnessing a lynching, he replied. And my loyalty is to the truth, something that seems to be in short supply here tonight. The truth, Bradley laughed harshly. The truth is that you're both criminals who have been bleeding this town dry. The truth is that we've been too soft, too trusting, too willing to believe the lies of people who see our kindness as weakness. He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising with passion. How many more businesses have to be robbed? How many more families have to suffer before we say enough? Tonight, we have the chance to end this cancer once and for all. And if you're wrong, the voice came from the back of the crowd. Anna couldn't see who had spoken, but the question carried clearly in the evening air. Then we're wrong about to drifters who contribute nothing to this community anyway, Bradley replied without hesitation. But if we're right, we save ourselves from months or years of continued theft and corruption. The callousness of the statement took Anna's breath away. To Bradley, she and Samuel weren't even human beings deserving of justice. They were acceptable losses in his quest to establish his authority over the town. Sheriff Dawson made one last attempt at reason. Tom, I can't allow this, whatever you think they've done. Burning people alive isn't justice, it's murder. Then step aside, Sheriff, Bradley replied coldly. Because this is happening whether you approve or not. Several men in the crowd moved closer to Dawson, their intentions clear. The sheriff looked around desperately, but found no support. Whatever authority his badge might have carried was meaningless against the fury of the mob. Please, Anna said, her voice breaking as she addressed the crowd directly. Please, you've known me for 3 years. Have I ever given you reason to believe I'm capable of theft? Have I ever been anything but grateful for whatever work and kindness you've shown me? Spare us the innocent act, Mrs. Henderson replied harshly. We know what you are now. What I am is a 16-year-old girl trying to survive in a world that took away everything I ever loved. Anna shot back, her fear finally giving way to anger. I've worked for every penny I've earned, slept in barns and sheds, and gone hungry more times than I can count. But I've never stolen from anyone, because my parents raised me to be honest even when honesty is hard. For a moment, her words seemed to reach some of the crowd. Anna could see uncertainty in several faces, the flicker of doubt that might have grown into reasonable questions about Bradley's accusations. But Bradley was too skilled a manipulator to let doubt take root. Beautiful words, he said mockingly, touching, even. But words are what criminals always use when they're caught. Actions matter more than words, and your actions have condemned you. He gestured to several men in the crowd. Bring kindling, lots of it. We're going to need a good, hot fire to make sure this job gets done right. The words galvanized the crowd into action. Anna watched in horror as people she had known for years hurried to gather wood, building materials, anything that would burn. They worked with the focused efficiency of people who had convinced themselves they were doing righteous work. Samuel reached out and found Anna's hand, squeezing it gently. "Be ready," he whispered. "Whatever happens, don't let them see you. Break." But Anna was already breaking. The sheer impossibility of her situation being condemned to death for crimes she hadn't committed by people who had once been her neighbors was overwhelming her ability to process what was happening. As the pile of combustible material grew higher in the center of the street, Anna realized that her life was about to end in the most horrible way imaginable, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The torches flickered in the growing darkness, casting eerie shadows on the faces of the mob. Somewhere in that crowd were people who had smiled at her, who had paid her for honest work, who had once shown her small kindnesses. But those people seemed to have vanished, replaced by strangers hungry for blood and retribution. As the pile of wood grew higher, Anna could smell the smoke from the torches mixing with the dust and fear in the air. This was really happening. In a matter of minutes, she would be tied to a stake and burned alive, condemned by the very community she had tried so hard to serve. "Please, God," she whispered, not caring who heard her, "if I'm going to die, let it be quick." But as she looked at the eager faces surrounding her, Anna feared that mercy was the last thing she could expect from this mob. They wanted to make an example of her, and examples were meant to be memorable. The kindling was nearly ready, and Tom Bradley was already selecting the men who would drag her to the pyre. In the flickering torchlight, their faces looked like demons preparing for a feast. Anna closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for what was coming, knowing that her next few minutes on Earth would be filled with more pain and terror than anyone should ever have to endure. The makeshift pyre stood nearly 6 feet high in the center of Clearwater Creek's Main Street, a monument to fear and mob justice that cast writhing shadows in the torchlight. Anna could smell the dry wood and hay, could almost feel the heat that would soon consume her. The crowd had formed a loose circle round the pile, their faces flushed with excitement and the intoxicating power of sanctioned violence. Tom Bradley stepped forward, gesturing to several of the burliest men in the crowd. "Bill, Frank, Pete, bind them and drag them to the fire. It's time this town learned what happens to those who prey on honest folks." Anna felt her knees give out as the reality of her situation crashed over her completely. This wasn't a nightmare she could wake up from. This was really happening. In minutes, she would be tied to that pile of wood and burned alive while her neighbors watched and cheered. But as the men moved toward her, Samuel Hayes stepped between them and Anna, his walking stick held horizontally like a barrier. "I said, stop." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made the approaching men pause. There was something different about Samuel now. The mild-mannered drifter was gone, replaced by someone who radiated quiet but unmistakable menace. "Get out of the way, Hayes," Bill Morrison growled. He was Jake Morrison's brother, a ranch hand with hands like ham hocks and a reputation for settling disputes with his fists. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me plenty," Samuel replied, his voice steady as granite. "You want to burn an innocent girl based on nothing but suspicion and prejudice. That makes it my concern." Bradley laughed harshly. "Still playing the hero, are you? Well, that's fine by me. We can burn you both together, save us the trouble of a second fire." "You can try," Samuel said quietly. Something in his tone made several of the approaching men hesitate. Despite his blindness, Samuel Hayes suddenly seemed far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "You're outnumbered 50 to 1, Bradley pointed out. "What exactly do you think you can accomplish?" Samuel's hand shifted on his walking stick, and Anna noticed for the first time that it wasn't an ordinary cane. The handle was worn smooth from use, and there was something about the way he held it that suggested it had served purposes beyond helping him navigate. "I think," Samuel said slowly, "that sometimes one person willing to stand up for what's right is worth more than 50 people convinced they're justified in doing wrong." "Enough talk," Bradley snapped. "Take them both." The men rushed forward, expecting to overwhelm a blind man and a frightened girl through sheer numbers. What they didn't expect was for Samuel to move like a man who could see perfectly. His walking stick came up in a smooth arc, catching Bill Morrison across the jaw with a crack that could be heard throughout the crowd. As Bill stumbled backward, Samuel spun the stick and drove the other end into Frank Hendrick's solar plexus, doubling him over. Pete Williams, the third man, tried to grab Samuel from behind, but the blind man seemed to sense the attack coming. He ducked low and swept Pete's legs with his stick, sending the big ranch hand crashing to the ground. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds, and when it was over, 3 of Clearwater Creek's toughest men were groaning in the dirt, while Samuel stood protectively in front of Anna, not even breathing hard. The crowd fell silent, staring in shock at what they had just witnessed. A blind drifter had just taken down 3 armed men without breaking a sweat, moving with the precision and skill of someone who had clearly seen combat before. "Impossible," someone whispered. Bradley's face was flushed with rage and embarrassment. "Rush him together. He can't fight all of us." But the crowd hesitated. Whatever they had expected from this confrontation, it wasn't to see their strongest men defeated so easily by someone they had dismissed as helpless. Samuel sensed their uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "Any man who wants to try me is welcome to step forward," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "But understand this, I spent 4 years fighting in the war, and I didn't lose my sight until the very end. I learned to fight without relying on my eyes because I had to, and I got very good at it." He gestured toward the 3 men still picking themselves up from the ground. "These gentlemen can tell you how good. You're still outnumbered," Bradley insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Numbers don't matter if people aren't willing to use them," Samuel replied. "And I'm betting most of these folks aren't as eager to get their heads cracked as they were to watch someone else do the dirty work." Anna could see the truth of his words reflected in the crowd's faces. It was one thing to cheer for violence from a safe distance, it was quite another to risk getting hurt while trying to deliver it. Dr. Matthews stepped forward, his elderly frame shaking with emotion. "This has gone far enough," he declared. "Samuel's right, we're about to commit murder based on nothing but speculation and mob hysteria." "Stay out of this, Doc," Bradley warned. "No," Matthews replied firmly. "I've stayed out of it too long already. I've watched this town work itself into a frenzy over crimes that might not even be connected to these 2 people. I've listened to accusations without evidence and condemnation without trial, but I won't stand by and watch us burn a young woman alive." His words seemed to break a spell that had fallen over the crowd. Anna could see people looking around uncertainly, as if waking up from a fever dream and wondering how they had gotten here. "The doctor's right," called out a voice from the back of the crowd. Anna recognized it as belonging to Mary Patterson, whose baby she had helped care for during a difficult illness. "I've known Anna for 3 years, and she's never been anything but kind and honest. She helped my family when we had nothing," added another voice. "Thomas Aldridge, the carpenter whose wife Anna had assisted during a difficult pregnancy. And she never asked for anything in return," said Jake Morrison, pushing forward through the crowd. "I've been thinking about this all evening, and I can't reconcile the girl I know with the criminal Tom's describing." Bradley could see his support eroding and fought desperately to maintain control. "Don't let them fool you with sentiment," he shouted. "These people are criminals. They've been robbing us blind. Where's the evidence?" Dr. Matthews demanded. "We searched their belongings and found nothing. We've heard no testimony from reliable witnesses. All we have are your suspicions and accusations." "Sometimes that's enough," Bradley replied, but his voice was losing its authority. Samuel stepped forward slightly, still keeping himself between Anna and the crowd. "Actually, sometimes that's exactly what leads to innocent people dying while the real criminals go free." "What's that supposed to mean?" Bradley snapped. "I mean that while you've been so focused on blaming Anna and me, you haven't been looking for the actual thieves," Samuel replied. "You've been so convinced you had your culprits that you stopped investigating." "We don't need to investigate further," Bradley insisted. "The evidence." "What evidence?" Samuel interrupted. "The fact that Anna works in businesses that later get robbed, that's not evidence, that's coincidence. And it's exactly the kind of coincidence that real thieves would love to see blamed on someone else." Anna could see doubt creeping into more faces in the crowd. Samuel was systematically dismantling Bradley's case, exposing the weak foundation of assumption and prejudice on which it was built. "Think about it," Samuel continued. "If I were planning to rob businesses in this town, would I really want to partner with someone who works in those businesses and would immediately be suspected? Or would I prefer to let her take the blame while I operated without suspicion? The logic was irrefutable, and Bradley knew it. His face was growing redder with each word, his authority slipping away like sand through his fingers. "You're all being played," he snarled. "Can't you see? This is exactly what they want to confuse you with clever words and false logic." But the crowd was no longer listening to him with the same blind faith. Dr. Matthews stepped up beside Samuel, adding his moral authority to the blind man's physical protection. "Tom," he said quietly, "this ends now. We're not burning anyone tonight." Bradley looked around desperately, seeking support from the mob he had so carefully cultivated. But the fever had broken, and people were beginning to see the horror of what they had almost done. Sheriff Dawson, who had been conspicuously silent during the confrontation, finally found his voice. "Tom's right about one thing. We do need to catch the real thieves, but we're going to do it proper-like, with investigation and evidence. There won't be any more lynch mobs in my town." Dr. Matthews added firmly, "Not while I have breath in my body." Bradley could see that his moment had passed, but he wasn't ready to give up completely. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Mark my words, these two will strike again, and when they do, everyone will remember who tried to stop us from preventing it." He turned and stalked away, followed by a handful of die-hard supporters. But the majority of the crowd remained, looking ashamed and uncertain about what they had almost done. Anna felt her legs finally give out completely, and she sank to the ground as the reality of her narrow escape hit her. She had come within minutes of being burned alive by people she had tried to serve faithfully for 3 years. Samuel knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe now." "How?" Anna whispered. "How did you know how to fight like that?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I told them I fought in the war, but I didn't tell them which side I fought for. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than people want to hear." Anna looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time, despite the darkness. "It doesn't matter to me which side you fought for. You saved my life tonight." "We saved each other," Samuel replied. "You gave me a reason to stand up and fight, and I gave you someone willing to stand beside you when no one else would." Dr. Matthews approached them, his elderly face creased with concern and shame. "Miss Anna, I owe you an apology. We all do. What almost happened here tonight, it's not who we want to be as a community." Anna struggled to her feet, Samuel's steady hand helping her up. "Dr. Matthews, I don't blame you or anyone else who came to their senses. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do." "That's very generous of you," Matthews replied. "But generosity doesn't erase the fact that we almost committed murder tonight." As the crowd began to disperse, many people stopped to offer Anna awkward apologies and promises that something like this would never happen again. Some seemed genuinely ashamed, while others appeared to be going through the motions to avoid social censure. Jake Morrison approached with obvious embarrassment. "Anna, I want you to know that your job is still here if you want it, and I'll make sure you're paid fairly from now on." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Anna replied. "That means a lot." As the last of the crowd drifted away, leaving only Anna, Samuel, and Dr. Matthews in the street beside the now abandoned pyre, the doctor turned to Samuel with curiosity. That was quite a display of fighting skill for a drifter. He observed, "Mind if I ask where you learned to handle yourself like that?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "I was a sergeant in the Confederate Army, 3rd Texas Infantry. Lost my sight to a piece of shrapnel at the Battle of Franklin, just a few months before the war ended." Dr. Matthews nodded slowly. "That explains a lot, and it probably explains why you didn't mention it before. There are still a lot of hard feelings about the war in these parts. I fought for what I believed in at the time," Samuel replied, "but that was a long time ago, and I've learned that there are more important battles to fight now, like the one we fought tonight." Anna looked between the two men, understanding finally why Samuel had been so willing to risk everything to protect her. He knew what it felt like to be judged and condemned for things beyond his control, to be seen as an enemy simply because of circumstances and choices that couldn't be changed. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Matthews smiled gently. Now we try to rebuild the trust that was nearly destroyed tonight, and we make sure that the real thieves, whoever they are, get caught and brought to justice. And we prove that Clearwater Creek is better than what it almost became," Samuel added, as they walked away from the pyre that would have claimed Anna's life. She felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that she truly belonged somewhere, not because she was tolerated or pitied, but because she had found people willing to stand with her when the darkness came. The torches were being extinguished one by one, and the last light flickered and died just as the first stars appeared. In the clear desert sky, tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the real thieves would still need to be caught. But tonight, justice had prevailed over mob rule, and courage had triumphed over fear. Anna Sullivan had faced the fire and survived, not because of any miracle, but because one blind man had seen more clearly than a mob of sighted people. And in that moment of truth, the soul of Clearwater Creek had been tested and found to contain more light than darkness. The stranger's torch had indeed blocked the flames, not with fire, but with the courage to stand alone against a crowd and declare that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds.